Good morning all, and thank you for joining us today in this webinar hosted by Hydrogen NI as we discuss the key opportunities and challenges in successfully growing the green hydrogen economy in Northern Ireland. My name is John Palmer. I am the chairperson of Hydrogen NI and will be moderating today's discussion. I'm a partner at UK law firm Shoosmiths in their energy and infrastructure team based in the Belfast office, and have spent the last decade advising clients across the renewable energy sector. The order for today's session is as follows. We will begin with a presentation introducing Hydrogen NI and the current state of play in NI. I will be outlining the focus and work of the group to date as it positions itself as the voice of the hydrogen industry here. We will then be joined by our panelists for a wide-ranging discussion on the opportunities and challenges we face as we work to deliver NI's hydrogen economy. Just before we begin, some housekeeping. As this is a webinar, your cameras are switched off and mics muted, so only our panelists appear on screen. Thank you to those who have submitted questions in advance of today's event. Please feel free to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to submit questions throughout the panel discussion, and I will do my best to ensure we incorporate them all. Today's event is being recorded and we will make it available online for anyone who has been able to join us or for those who would like to watch it again. Hydrogen NI is a membership group set up in May 2021 to provide a voice for industry and organisations with an interest in developing a green hydrogen economy here in Northern Ireland. By bringing together leading industry players and key stakeholders, the group's aim has been to turn high-level strategic support for hydrogen into creating real opportunities for investment and development. In a short space of time, the group has established a diverse membership spanning across renewable energy and storage companies, gas network operators, and leading advisory firms. Hydrogen NI's main focus to date has been on direct engagement with key decision makers and influencers at a strategic level. This has led to Hydrogen NI being recognised as the go-to authority on the development of the hydrogen economy in Northern Ireland. In terms of engagement, over the last 12 months, the group has held a number of industry events, including our Autumn 2021 event with Economy Minister Gordon Lyons as the keynote speaker. The group has directly briefed MLAs, key committee members and councillors across NI. When it comes to shaping policy options for future hydrogen development, the group has submitted consultation responses on strategic issues, including the energy strategy and planning policy for renewables. And in March, we were delighted to provide a formal briefing to Stormont's Committee for Infrastructure on NI's green hydrogen future. In the coming months, we will host further webinars and networking events and continue with our direct engagement efforts. We consider this a timely moment to host our latest series of webinars now that we have an operational energy strategy, accompanying action plan, and forthcoming climate change legislation with legally binding targets. Hydrogen NI's position is that clean hydrogen offers significant economic, environmental and social benefits for Northern Ireland. As a result of our geography, infrastructure and expertise, this region is ideally suited to develop a thriving clean hydrogen economy and to secure a competitive advantage. We believe from extensive wind energy resources, a hydrogen-ready modern gas network and natural storage facilities at Islandmagee. As things stand, NI produces about 40% of its electricity from renewables, mostly onshore. Globally, policy and economic forces are converging to create a momentum in the hydrogen sector, with considerable sums of green capital available for investment in hydrogen technologies. Alongside electricity and other solutions, hydrogen provides an essential component when it comes to decarbonising our society and meeting ambitious net zero targets. In our neighbouring jurisdictions, this momentum is turned into action. GB has published a hydrogen strategy and as part of its new energy security strategy has just doubled its hydrogen production target to 10 gigawatts by 2030. It has announced a wide-ranging investment package to implement this new strategy with significant financial support for hydrogen, including the £240 million Net Zero Hydrogen Fund. The Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy has recently announced plans to introduce the first national subsidy for clean hydrogen production by the end of 2022. It is vital, therefore, that NI does not fall behind. We must drive the development of suitable hydrogen policy, allowing us to extract the full benefit from our homegrown renewable energy sources, drive down costs, and end our reliance on volatile and expensive fossil fuels. At present, there are, in fact, several successful projects and initiatives underway in Northern Ireland, many of which our members in Hydrogen NI are involved. However, the scope and scale of the work in GB is more extensive, and this is in large part due to the more conducive and supportive policy and regulatory framework. To attract levels of private investment required to accelerate the growth of the hydrogen economy, investors need confidence that they can effectively mitigate risk, and there's much to do regarding policy, legislation, and regulation to provide this certainty, as our panelists will shortly be discussing. Hydrogen NI and its engagement to date with decision makers has focused on 4 key areas. A radical overhaul of our failing planning system so it actively supports climate mitigation projects, the development of a policy and regulatory framework which facilitates all aspects of a hydrogen economy, skills and training programs to develop a hydrogen-ready workforce, and developing routes to market that support the pathway to the commercialisation of hydrogen. Hydrogen NI sees growing the green hydrogen economy as a means of tackling both climate change and the energy crisis. Current events highlight that an indigenous clean energy supply is necessary to protect consumers here in Northern Ireland. Recent predictions indicate that energy prices will remain significantly high for the rest of this decade. However, we now have a chance to develop a more secure, clean future energy system, and we look forward to discussing with you all how we can work together to deliver this. We move now to our discussion, and I am delighted to welcome 3 panelists who bring wide-ranging expertise across a range of renewable energy projects and technologies, and who can speak to all aspects of delivering the hydrogen economy. We will also open the floor to questions from our audience. Our panelists are looking forward to engaging meaningfully with as many of you as time permits. A warm welcome to Tamsin Fraser, Gary Borland and Daniel McLaughlin. Tamsin is UK Director of ABO Wind, a key member of Renewable NI, who Tamsin is also representing here today. ABO Wind is a major international renewable energy developer and has been active in NI since 2010. Tamsin leads delivery of projects across the UK and is well versed in the challenges that developers encounter, particularly in Northern Ireland. Gary is a director at the Belfast office of global advisory firm KPMG and leads on M&A and fundraising arrangements in the renewable energy sector throughout Ireland across a range of technologies. He is an active Hydrogen NI committee member and recently spoke on behalf of the group to the NI Assembly Infrastructure Committee about the opportunities hydrogen offers in decarbonisation of the heat and transport sectors. Daniel McLaughlin is Director of Belmont Strategy, a communications consultancy focusing on clean energy planning and infrastructure. Daniel has worked on a wide range of large-scale renewable projects and policy issues, advising clients in the development of communication strategies and stakeholder engagements. Okay, Tamsin, Gary, Daniel, thank you for taking part today. We do have a number of questions collated from various emails that we have received. And Tamsin, I think we'll start with the first question with yourself.
Okay, thank you.
ABO Wind is perhaps best known for delivering projects in onshore wind and more recently battery storage. However, I understand you have recently submitted a planning application for an electrolyser and have plans for similar projects. What has led you to becoming involved in hydrogen production and investing in clean energy here in Northern Ireland?
Super, thanks for that, John, and thank you very much for the invite today to chat to everyone. Yeah, look, we've been actively involved in developing renewable energy projects for around 25 years now, starting out in Germany and now working across Europe and South America. The core business for us has always been onshore wind, but in the last few years we have developed quite a significant solar arm and more recently battery storage projects globally as well. In fact, we're actually building the group's first 50 megawatt project here in Northern Ireland at the moment, which is very, very exciting for us. I think our central motivation as a developer is addressing climate change, always has been. So as a group, we've really been consistently trying to diversify and adapt over the years to ensure that we are at the forefront of delivering projects to try and really make a difference. As a result, we're now working on a pipeline of various technologies of about 19 gigawatts in 16 countries. So we've had quite a range of experiences, as you can imagine, across those countries. I think moving into hydrogen and the hydrogen space feels like a very natural progression for us. It's very exciting. I think there's lots of potential, and it sits very neatly sort of alongside our core business and our core values as a developer. We have established a dedicated future energies team in our headquarters in Germany, who are really focusing on hydrogen production across the globe. And as you noted, I'm really pleased that we're actually already able to bring forward a pilot project here in Northern Ireland. That being said, I think Northern Ireland is very well placed actually to be a leader in the green hydrogen economy. I think there's clear ambition and political will in terms of the energy strategy and obviously the climate change bill recently. And I think more than ever now, as you've already touched on, the recent energy crisis is really putting an absolute laser focus on the urgent need to move away from reliance on imported fossil fuels and ensure that we have our own security of supply locally. So I think that's going to be a major driver for the hydrogen economy. Obviously, we have a very strong renewables sector here in Northern Ireland as well. So I think with that background, if we can get all the necessary levers in place, that we can develop a really world-leading, strong green energy, green hydrogen economy here in Northern Ireland.
Thank you, Tamsin. Maybe Daniel, just to bring you in respect of the political will to deliver hydrogen projects. Obviously, with international events, the energy security and energy pricing has become a major issue. Given that hydrogen economy will involve new and innovative thinking and will require strong leadership from the Assembly and the Executive, where do our political leaders currently stand when it comes to developing hydrogen as a fuel?
Yeah, thanks, John, and thanks for having me. So there's been really strong high-level political support for hydrogen, particularly over the last year or year and a half. If you take a quick look at the manifestos that we've seen so far, it does get a mention in each manifesto. So the high-level support is definitely there. For the sector now, for the industry as a whole, it's about putting a bit of meat on the bones, helping the executive and the Assembly, as well as local councils, understand exactly what needs to happen to deliver these projects, deliver the economic benefits, and create the opportunities that we're all talking about. So we have a supportive energy strategy and action plan. Now it's about delivery. There is an ambition to become a world leader in clean hydrogen for Northern Ireland. We hear that repeated quite often by our political leaders. We are some way off that at the minute. We're not quite there. If we're not careful, we could find ourselves in a position where we are trying to play catch up. To avoid that happening, I would say we need a functioning executive after the election, as soon as possible after the election. I don't think it benefits anyone to have a period of hiatus. Obviously, there are issues that will have to be sorted, but I think across industry, everyone would agree that a functioning executive and Assembly is vital for Northern Ireland, and not least for the hydrogen sector. So when you're dealing with new, novel issues, that leadership is very important. Tamsin touched on planning, you touched on planning, John. The regulator has a key role to play in this as well, and we need political leadership to lead on that. So there's high level support, but the devil's in the detail.
Thank you, Daniel. Gary, in the vein of investment for hydrogen projects, obviously hydrogen is going to be a globally competitive market, especially in terms of investment. What interest is there in NI from funds at the moment, and what can we be doing to attract more interest?
Morning, John. Thanks for the invite. I think it's fair to say, John, that there's never been, in the last couple of years, there has never been more money available generally within the capital markets, but also there has never been more of that money targeted towards the renewable energy space and the decarbonisation agenda more broadly. As a province, we've just had our energy strategy that we waited a number of years for, and everyone broadly welcomed that. We've also then had the climate change bill come in and set targets, revised targets even for renewable electricity. Now that's put us on a par with the Republic of Ireland. It's driving a lot of new money into development assets generally. It's driving certainly money towards assets that are income producing or are near term income producing. So there's a lot of interest in offshore wind in the Republic. There will be offshore wind in due course, hopefully in NI as well. But where has the real money been moving in the last couple of years has been established technology, onshore wind, solar, battery projects, and to a lesser degree in NI in things like biomass and anaerobic digestion. Now that's given a flavour of, and I'll come to your question in a second. It's given a flavour that there is interest there. But what's really important for investor interest is being able to see a route to market for an asset. So there is, I would say there is a good level of interest. I wouldn't say there's a high level of interest. There's a good level of interest within the investor community for hydrogen within NI. But I think the challenge is that it's going to be, it's perceived as a medium-term ambition as opposed to a near-term ambition. And with investors, a number of them need to and would like to deploy money quickly and to deploy that money into something that's going to produce a return relatively quickly thereafter. So for hydrogen, there's probably a couple of barriers to getting some of the larger scale projects off the ground. Whereas at the moment, what we're seeing is that actually a lot of the interest at the moment in NI is coming from local counterparties. So you take the example, for instance, of, TransLink was probably the first project that a number of people would have heard about, with the introduction of a couple of hydrogen buses within Belfast. You've also then had a project, for instance, with NI Water. Tamsin has mentioned their interest in getting a potential project through planning, and also there are a couple of other parties, as well as Island McGee, who are trying to get an industry off the ground. And there is an element here of chicken and egg. TransLink decided to invest in buses that created a demand that created someone else, created then a need for an electrolyzer. So there is certainly going to need to be, there's that chicken and egg debate between, are we going to be demand led or production led? And if you're an investor, you would much rather be chasing the demand, i.e. to be able to produce that hydrogen to meet that demand, than creating a product, building an asset, creating a product that you're then trying to sell into someone else. Mm-hmm. So I think the investment community is there, but if you look across GB in the recently published investor roadmap on hydrogen, you'll see there are 10 times more projects available in GB than there is in NI, and at significant scale compared to some of the assets that are currently being talked about within NI.
I think obviously with GB that they do have the industrial clusters with the current demand for hydrogen in terms of NI, that demand is going to have to be created. Tamsin, in terms of offtake of hydrogen, are you seeing a strong appetite from potential end users for your project, or is it still a speculative stage?
Yeah, I mean, I think even the formation and growth of a group like Hydrogen NI over the last 12 months, I think is testament to the appetite for hydrogen in Northern Ireland, and I think that's certainly been reflected in some of the discussions we're having. As Gary touched on there, there's this huge amount of work has already been ongoing around the province, not least, the production of the hydrogen buses, the recent launch of the Hydrogen Training Academy in Mid and East Antrim, and some of the exploratory work that is being carried out by the local gas suppliers, which I think is all very, very positive stuff. I think for me, it's important that we're actually producing the green hydrogen in Northern Ireland, and to be a true economy, we need to be producing that here and not just relying on imports. And I think that's been a key catalyst for us as a developer in bringing the project that we have forward so far. I think with high levels of renewables in Northern Ireland and relatively high levels of dispatch down at times, I think there's great potential for both on-site electrolyzers, you know, at wind farms directly, and on grid-connected electrolyzers as well. And longer term, obviously thinking about synthetic fuels, I think that's going to be a big growth area. That said, look, it is an emerging market, and to use Gary's phrase, you know, it is very much a chicken and egg scenario for both the developers and the end users. I think the wider market for larger scale projects and production, it's a bit of a longer way to go. I think the market has to be right. It very much is supply versus demand, and I think the investment signals and indeed the support to make that switch for the end users as well has to be there to really actively encourage that, and I think that will be a key driver.
Yeah. Following on from that, Daniel, if we look at what a future hydrogen economy globally may look like, in terms of NI plc, we very much want to be an exporter, not an importer of hydrogen, where we miss out on all the benefits of that economy. But in terms of the opposition between perhaps local opposition and strategic developments being deployed, how is that to be dealt with, given that when we look at a hydrogen development, we're looking at issues about indigenous supply, the price certainty, etc. Looks like it's going to be a cheaper way to secure cheap electricity prices, that we have our own indigenous supply of energy. How do we deal with that with opposition on the ground?
Yeah, no, and it's a classic issue that we're seeing across the renewables sector. John, at the minute, Tamsin will know only too well that you get very strong strategic support from the executive and Stormont, high level public support, but when it comes to delivering the projects on the ground in a certain area, you invariably meet opposition or face concerns. So that's an issue that's going to face the renewable sector in the coming years. It could have a bearing on whether or not we can reach our 2030 targets. Obviously, we would say that strong political leadership will play an important role in that. So I think at this stage, when it comes to decarbonisation, everyone knows the need to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels and tackle the impacts of climate change. That's out of the question. But the debate's shifting a wee bit now as well. It's about developing a medium to long-term sustainable indigenous supply so that we aren't exposed to the volatility of the global markets that we see at the minute. So as a sector and as an industry, we need to communicate those benefits. We obviously need political leadership, but there's also an onus on us to create cover and give a platform to elected leaders and community leaders to come out and support these projects for the greater good. Will you always please everyone? It's impossible, and I see, not to jump ahead, but I see a question there from Emma Kelly, and Emma's raising the issue of the conflict arising in the local development plans and the inability of the planning service system to support these new technologies. LDPs raise a number of issues, particularly in terms of renewables and offshore wind. We've seen recently how the planning system coped or didn't cope with battery energy storage as an emerging technology. That was an absolute debacle. Almost overnight, a single update from the department put the stoppers on an entire sector. So Hydrogen NI, I know, have been doing a lot of work to try and preempt those scenarios arising when it comes to the development of hydrogen infrastructure. So one of the key messages is, look, for the planning system is, look, you can't just learn as you go and change your mind at some point in the next 2-3 years about policy or how you approach these things. Let's get around the table now and discuss what needs to happen so that these projects can be delivered. So there's definitely a gap between the strategic level, the local level politically, and then the planning system has a huge role to play in this. But the only real way to overcome those issues is to keep engaging consistently and make sure that people understand the whole picture when it comes to clean hydrogen. So obviously huge environmental benefits, there are economic benefits as well, and your security of supply benefits also. So it's the industry has a lot of work to do to engage with leaders elected leaders, community leaders, to try and get to the point where there is an understanding and support for these projects.
Okay, thanks for that, Daniel. In terms of the planning system, then I was going to leave it to last, but I'll try to find something maybe positive to end on. Thomas, in terms of the planning system, it's no secret that it's a major barrier to progress and is the biggest single threat to us achieving 2030. Presumably this is a concern when we look at new technologies like hydrogen as well.
Yeah, absolutely, John. I mean, planning is by far the biggest challenge we face in Northern Ireland, and I think that cross-cuts all sectors, not just the energy sector. It's a common theme whenever we talk to many people. Decision making is slow, it's inconsistent, and communication is becoming ever poorer. Wind energy is going to be at the core of the hydrogen economy here. So if we're really serious about delivering a thriving hydrogen economy, green hydrogen economy, it's essential that the renewable energy projects that are needed to deliver that are being delivered urgently, and we're not seeing that at the moment. As a global developer, as I've already said, we have an interest in 16 different markets, and I think it's really interesting actually whenever you look at what's happening in Europe at the moment, where as a result of the energy crisis and everything that is going on, they're taking urgent steps to map out how moving forward renewable energy projects can actually be, and the associated infrastructure, should be treated as projects of overriding public interest. There's a real sense of urgency in trying to move those forward. And I think let's compare that to the Northern Ireland projects that we see that are already taking 4 and 5 years plus to get through the planning system. And if I'm honest, it feels like it's getting worse. Mm-hmm. So despite having an executive endorsed energy strategy and the climate change bill, the departments aren't working together to make sure that these critically needed projects are actually being delivered, not only just to meet the targets, but actually for the benefit of the consumer as well, which, let's not forget how important that is. So I think for me, collaboration really is key. And I can't stress that enough, that business as usual is no longer an option. And I say that for us as developers, for the decision makers, to the regulators and beyond. It's just not feasible to work as we have been in the past. We aren't far off being halfway through 2022. So, that's 7.5 years to plan, permit, build, bring into operation, double the generation that we already have installed to get to the 2030 targets. And that's not including any additional potential generation needed dedicated for hydrogen. So really, in essence, the target isn't actually 2030. The target is 26, 27 to have those permits in place to ensure that we're bringing the projects forward to actually be operational and delivering for 2030. And I think that's quite startling whenever you break that down. We're in the mouth of the election now, coming up in May. And I think for me, planning and energy, well, let's get the executive up and running again. And when we do, planning and energy have to be absolutely key urgent themes. We have a 5-year mandate coming up. And actually this next 5 years is probably the most critical 5 years that we have leading up to 2030. So those have got to be key themes. Just picking up on a point that Daniel made there as well, I think it's absolutely essential that policy is not made on the hoof, particularly for emerging technologies. There's always going to be times now and in the future, even thinking beyond the 2050, there's always going to be times when there's emerging technologies coming forward. So decision makers are going to have to be ready, they're going to have to be flexible, and they're going to have to openly engage with the sector. We just can't have abrupt and unexpected changes, as Daniel has said, such as that as we experienced in the battery sector, as a result of a chief planner's update in December 2020. That had such a massively chilling effect on the sector, and it really impacts and disincentivizes investment overnight. We just cannot have any such repeats. And so I think it's important moving forward that the departments are really working collaboratively if the hydrogen economy is going to flourish, to make sure things like that don't happen.
Yeah. Thank you, Thomas. And Gardy, perhaps just to bring you in terms of investment and the impact that the planning risk has in that respect, because it's not just obviously the time it takes to get a permit. It seems to be the irrationality of decisions that there is no certainty going into a site that you have a good chance of receiving a permission or not. How does investment look at the planning system and the risks compared to, I guess, especially GB and the Republic of Ireland, because we are competing with investment?
Yeah, I think it's not even just about planning anymore, John, as well, because in the last number of months, in particular, we've seen a lot of the capital expenditure itself increase quite dramatically, and even forecasts for that are increasing quite dramatically. So, the price of wind turbines, and again, this is not just about hydrogen, because we need to develop the wind assets, the solar assets, the battery assets that will all form a part of the network that will end up in the production of hydrogen as well, and to meet those wider targets. The issue has been that, and it's well known, the price of concrete, the price of steel, the price of components, the price of labour, all of those things are driving up costs. Then if you add into that a planning delay of 6, 12, 24 months, all of a sudden that certainty that an investor sort of looks for and craves, and that a lot of these investors know there are risks involved, but when you add into the mix time and uncertainty, or whether it's grid connections, and it's not just about planning as well, those issues all start to make the economics of a project that bit more uncertain. And if they can find a development asset in another jurisdiction, whether it's in the Republic of Ireland, Scotland, Wales, England, or beyond, or into the continent, you will always try and put your money where it is going to get you a more certain return. Now, that's not to say people are scared of investment in NI. They will certainly invest in NI when lots of those uncertainties are reduced to an acceptable degree. But yeah, we are competing with those other projects across the water and in the Republic, where no system is perfect. It's not to say that you can get planning much quicker or much more certain in another jurisdiction, but it's one of those multiple factors, I think, that an investor will look at when they're deciding where to deploy their money and when to deploy their money.
Okay, thank you. Gary, perhaps moving on to the demand side and one of the benefits of NI having the modern gas grid. That obviously will be a key factor in providing some terms of certainty of demand if we can permit a hydrogen blend into the gas network and thereby create a suitably large demand. Investors also require certainty regarding demand and price. What kind of support mechanisms and other measures should government and policymakers be putting in place to establish a hydrogen as a cost competitive alternative fuel to fossil fuel?
Well, maybe start with the premise of blending, John, and it's well enough known that there are trials ongoing in the UK, sorry, in GB, and there are plans to have neighbourhood, village, town level blends, and in fact maybe moving towards 100% isolated areas of the network over the next number of years. But I think it's also important to remember that hydrogen blending with gas is not the only route to market, or not the only use that hydrogen can be put to. I think we always have to remember that hydrogen is going to be one of the tools that we use. It might not always be the only tool or the best tool to deploy, but what's important is that we deploy it in the best sector. So if that means blending it in the gas network is the best route to go, that's the best one to do. But equally, if it's better deployed as a decarbonisation of transport, if it's better deployed as a decarbonisation of heat in very specific industrial sectors, I think that's where it's really important. Because again, that's where you get the best use of the asset, which should derive your best return in terms of what the alternatives are if you're trying to move away from fossil fuels. So I think in terms of likely support mechanisms, for instance, we're aware that the hydrogen business model, and I think you referenced it in your introduction, that business model is due to be announced later in the year, and that's hopefully going to give some certainty around how the cost versus the cost of production, which certainly in the early stages of the industry is going to be high compared to what the market's going to be able to sustain, and hopefully help bridge that gap. But I think it's going to be broader than that in terms of policies required to actually help deliver that. By policies, I mean we have to get over the infrastructure challenge. So, Tamsin talked about where the electrolyzers are going to be located, whether they're on grid or whether they're co-located with a wind farm or a solar plant, for instance. The issue is going to be around how do we transport, how do we store hydrogen. in NI terms, it's a new product, it's a new gas. So there is likely to be, health and safety considerations, maybe some regulatory challenges to overcome there. And again, then it's matching that supply and demand. It's okay to produce a product in one part of NI, but if it's not needed until the other side of the province, that's where the transport piece comes in. It's where the storage piece comes in. And again, if we only look at wind as the source of generation, which I think is actually incorrect, because wind by its nature is intermittent. So if that's going to be the method of production, the demand may be at a different time of the year, a different time of the day. So that need to get a balance and get a proper market involved, I think is going to be important. Now, that's not to say that to start with, there may well be some bilateral examples, i.e. exactly what Translink have done with Energia, what NI Water are doing, in producing hydrogen to actually source the oxygen, as far as they're concerned, is more important. But at a small scale, it's okay to have those bilaterals to establish the technology, establish the market, help get baseline costs, for instance, in an NI context. But I think it's going to be equally important then to create a generic or a more general market for a hydrogen product, particularly as you move towards transport as the end user, because ideally you want transport to be able to use it in much the same way as we use, a diesel pump today or a petrol pump today, that they can go to, okay, maybe more limited numbers of filling points, but that they can go anywhere in the province and potentially on the island. Because again, we can't ignore the fact that that the province is relatively small and we depend a lot on cross-border transport. So I think it's going to be important that we do this on a joined up basis as well. Mm-hmm. So in terms of that support mechanism, I actually think it has to be much broader. One, there has to be more renewables, and I think it's firmly established within the energy strategy that is something that will come. I think what's going to be the broader benefit to NI is that we've touched earlier on being energy independent or having at least a degree of energy independence, but also there are going to be benefits there as well in terms of job creation, and we've touched upon the Centre of Excellence. But NI has a huge manufacturing capability, always has done, a long tradition in being able to make things. And I think here is an opportunity for us to use those to our advantage. Mm-hmm. We have a gas network, as you mentioned, that's modern. We have storage capability at Island McGee and potentially in other places. And therefore, we need to be able to try and join a lot of these dots together to make the case for a green hydrogen economy going forward. And I think that will dictate what level of support is required, because I think the support has to be tailored to the market that it's going to operate in. But I do think that the business model itself is going to give a good foundation. But I think there's going to have to be an NI specific lens applied to it in due course, because of some of those unique facets that I think NI has.
Yeah, no, I would agree entirely with that, Gary, especially in terms of some of the NI specifics. For instance, rock accredited energy from wind that's already out there to ensure that's not precluded from receiving any subsidy if it's used for the production of hydrogen. Thomas, just to bring you in terms of the subsidy, if there is a subsidy, I think BEIS are minded to do a CFD on production. So I think that will probably incentivize and create a lot of collaboration with end users and developers. Is that something that you've looked at? I know you've mentioned it's not business as usual for anyone going forward. Are we going to see a lot more collaboration in projects?
Yeah, I think so, John. And I mean, it's about balancing that risk for both the off-taker and the developer. I think commercial viability of any new technology requires some sort of certainty. And that comes from the sound policy, the regulatory environment, and also that revenue support to really help establish it as a viable solution. I think, as with most new technologies, targeted incentivization is important to really help the emerging technology become cost competitive and reduce the risk for stakeholders. And I think that Northern Ireland lens is very, very important. And that's certainly something which we are discussing wider as a sector around the contracts for difference coming forward, how we ensure that we are competitive with other parts of GB, and also that the consumer is benefiting from deployment locally as well. So I think the Northern Ireland lens is really key.
Yeah. Thank you. Daniel?
Yeah, conscious that we all want to focus on the opportunities associated with the green hydrogen economy. For developers and investors, you have to look at the risks and the challenges. Obviously, Hydrogen NI is doing that. They're trying to proactively address a number of the challenges that the sector is likely to face. But I suppose the group has shown over the last year that there is huge interest in this. We touched on the fact at the start that there's a lot of positivity at a political level. There's a need for new innovative approaches in terms of how we power our everyday lives. So although things are at an early stage and although there are challenges, there are huge opportunities, and in a way this is a perfect stage for the sector to come together and influence the direction of travel and inform policymakers and decision makers so that we can deliver all the benefits. And we have seen, 15, 20 years ago, people would have told you were mad if you said that renewable generation would supply 40% of our electricity. So we've shown that Northern Ireland and Northern Ireland companies, and as well as external companies, can achieve great things if the policy levers are there and if there's a supportive environment. So it feels like that's where we are at the minute with hydrogen. Yes, there are questions that can't be answered as such at the minute, but Hydrogen NI shows that you're getting a lot of the key players around the table, the gas network operators, KPMGs of the world, Abowind, and other developers, and we're all thrashing out solutions and highlighting opportunities. So although there are challenges, of course, planning, the regulator, I think personally, represents a huge challenge across the board when it comes to getting that 2030 target. We're working to address those challenges, but the reason everyone's here and there is a focus in this sector is because there are opportunities, and hydrogen provides a solution to a lot of different problems that are very difficult to solve otherwise.
Thank you. Gary, in terms of, we've had a few questions just in terms of NI becoming a net exporter of green hydrogen. Is that a view you share? Are we getting a little bit too ambitious too quickly? But is that where we should be aiming to be?
I've never any issue with people having ambition, John. Certainly, to get to the level where we could be an exporter, I think would be fantastic. But to be honest, I think it's quite far away. If I come back to the point about, if we have all of these advantages and all of these resources available to us in terms of being able to produce a lot of hydrogen, I think we have to get to the point where we can deploy that in the best possible place. If that's blending, great. If it's HGVs, great. If it's in industrial processes, that's great too. Because I think the alternative for us, of having to import some form of energy for that sector would seem counterproductive. So if we can get to the point where we can deal with our own local need and then look towards export, that's great. But I also don't think that when we talk about the export of green hydrogen, I don't think we should be considering that as just an export of gas through a pipeline, because I think that's got its own challenges around trying to get involved with something like reverse flow back into the GB market, for instance, or potentially exporting into the Republic of Ireland. I do think it's more likely that we'll be able to export hydrogen, but in another format. So, for instance, possibly through something like ammonia, where it's more easily shipped in bulk, more readily available to be shipped abroad. But I do think that it should be a much longer term ambition, because I think ultimately we have our own target for NI decarbonisation. And if hydrogen is to play its part, I think it has to play that part to its full and then consider export.
Thank you, Gary. I think we're at the end of today's session. So thank you very much, everyone who took the time out to join us this morning to discuss the very exciting prospects that NI's hydrogen economy offers and how we can convert this momentum into real action. which needs to play out in this decade if we want to meet our ambitions and climate goals. And as Tamsin has said, that's not 2030. We need to be getting there midway through this decade. I'd like to thank our panelists, Tamsin, Gary and Daniel, for their insight during our panel discussion and in responding to the audience questions. Hydrogen NI has a Twitter and LinkedIn account, which you can follow for updates. And for those of you who would like to consider membership for your organisation, please visit the website for further details. We hope you can join us at our next webinar with DFE's Edward Kerr in May, details of which should be published very soon on social media. So again, thank you everyone for taking part today. Thank you.